Hello, everyone. So I got a few additional questions shortly after I filmed my Q&A video yesterday. So I decided I will do like a mini part two to answer the other questions. So let's get started. Okay, the first question is, how do I feel about Kim Kardashian's bare bum all over the internet? Okay, some of you thoughts about this. You've probably seen the Break the Internet spread Kim K did with Paper Magazine. Disclaimer, I really like the Kardashians, so just FYI. So basically, at first I didn't really think anything of it other than like, cool. I'm all about people doing what they want, owning their sexuality, etc. There's one picture in specifically where Kim is like popping a champagne bottle and the champagne's like in an arc, and she is balancing a champagne glass on her ass. And at first, again, it seemed like kind of a cool concept, but then on the Griot, it was revealed that actually this photo was a replica of a photo taken, I think, in the late 1800s of a woman. I can't remember her name. She's an African American woman, and at the time, she was being used in like freak shows and stuff because she had a really big butt, and like people thought all of these super racist things about black people being animalistic, and it's okay to look at someone like a freak show and put them in a cage, and et cetera, because those things were kind of popular at that point. And so it turns out that this photo was just a replica of that photo, which is super based in racism and grossness. So, I don't feel that great about that. I actually kind of doubt Kim knew about that, but obviously the photographer did, and they've said this photographer is kind of gross. So, yeah, I don't feel good about that picture. Super, super racist, and I can't believe someone would even want to replicate something like that. Like, ew. So, but the other pictures, there's one where she has her like bare butt, and then another that's a full frontal. And I don't care, if somebody wants to be naked, go for it. Like, do it. Do what you want. But so many people have been criticizing and slut shaming Kim for posing nude. And a lot of people have said because she's a mother, she shouldn't be doing that kind of stuff. Like Naya Riviera actually said something like that. And I think that just doesn't make any sense. It's like, how do you think people got to be mothers in the first place? And there's nothing about being a mom that means you can't be sexual. I hate all of those notions in our society and our media that if you're a mother, you're suddenly supposed to be asexual and you're not allowed to display your sexuality. Like, yes, you are. Having children doesn't mean you can't be sexual. Like, that is such a sexist thing to try to police women's sexuality like that because they have children. So, yeah, I hate that stuff, and I think it's totally fine that she wants to pose naked. So, don't like the racist picture. The other pictures are cool with me. Okay, so the next question is, how can a guy approach a woman without harassing her? Now, this was asked by a guy, and I assume you mean in public spaces. So like out in public-y type places, like public transportation, or just on the street, or in a coffee shop, or stuff like that. So basically, I think there's kind of three parts to this answer. So the first part, I think, is try to do it in a way, obviously, that's respectful, but I think not going off looks as like the first thing, because women, a lot of times when they're street harassed, it's about looks or like sexuality in some kind of way. So I think trying to not go off of that, finding another kind of common thread that you want to talk to somebody about or approach someone about that isn't about their looks, is great. Even if it's like a piece of clothing that you like, or just something that's not like their body, because that can feel super uncomfortable and invasive. So that's number one. Number two, I think, is giving women an out, if you understand what I mean. So don't make it seem like they have to talk to you or that you're like demanding of their time. There's a lot of cool memes on the internet, like women don't owe you shit, women don't owe you our time, because we don't. Women don't owe anyone anything. So, giving someone the opportunity to not engage with you, and then obviously not giving them shit for not engaging if that's what they decide. So like, for example, like let's say you like someone's boots and you're like, hey, I really like your boots, do you mind telling me where they're from? Or approaching someone and saying like, hey, do you mind if I ask you a question about this newspaper article that you're reading? Make it a question so that they are free to say, you know what, no, I'm late to class, or no, I don't really have time right now, or I just don't really want to talk about it, and then obviously respecting that answer. So I think that's really important, giving them an out. And then also looking for cues that somebody doesn't want to be approached. So, like, for example, if somebody's walking in the street and they're wearing earbuds, probably shouldn't approach them because they're kind of showing that they don't really want to be approached. And, they're going to have to take their earbuds out and do this whole thing to talk to you. So, look for those cues and those signs that somebody's busy and doesn't want to be approached, etc. So those are like the three things. It's like try not to go off of bodies at all would be great. Number 2 is to give them an out when you approach them. And number 3 is making sure that you can approach them and looking for those cues. So that's what I would say. Okay, the last question. I need to go to my Tumblr ask box. Do you believe that femininity and masculinity can have definitions that do not exclude or abuse people? Does it exist on a spectrum? If they do have a definition, is it possible for people to take that definition and not transform it into an abusive term? Okay, so I'll go question by question. So do you believe that femininity and masculinity can have definitions that do not exclude or abuse people? It's a good question because they're labels, so naturally labels are exclusionary just by definition of what labels are. So, I don't know. I don't really think so because, again, by definition. In terms of abusing people, I think absolutely you could have definitions of femininity and masculinity that don't abuse people. And I think a huge part of that is not making them expectations or making them based in, like, worth, because that's the biggest problem, I think, is that, especially with, like, masculinity, there's a lot of worth tied to it. Like, in society, your worth as a man is tied to your masculinity. So getting away from those really oppressive concepts, I think, is key to making it not abusive. Okay, so do they exist on a spectrum? Yeah, absolutely. There's not one way to be feminine or one way to be masculine, or there's not only one type of femininity or masculinity that exists. It's a very broad definition. Absolutely. And some people are more feminine than others, and some people are more masculine than others, and some people like are feminine but might be like low on the spectrum, and so absolutely, there's a spectrum. If they do have a definition, is it possible for people to take that definition and not transform it into an abusive term? So I sort of already said but I think it comes down to rethinking about how we view masculinity and femininity. So not viewing them as expectations tied to people's worth, or even a given, because we assume men are masculine, we assume women are feminine. So we got to get rid of all of these expectations and gender norms and gender roles and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that make femininity and masculinity abusive, And I think that is a lot of work, and as a culture, we need to do that. I mean, you can do it on an individual basis, obviously, but definitely culturally, that's something we need to do, because, it shouldn't be based on these really oppressive, normative, gross stuff, and people shouldn't feel like they need to be a certain way or express their gender in a certain way, and it should really be way more broad than that. And I think even getting rid of like, oh, you can only be feminine or masculine, and look at this whole area in the middle that we're totally missing. And I think that really needs to happen. So thank you all for the questions. If you want me to do more of these, I'm happy to. Just send me your questions, and kisses.